Hi folks, Welly speaking here. I'm a cloud solution architect for Microsoft APAC. In the previous video, we did a crash course about ARM, Azure Resource Manager, an infrastructure as code solutions which allows you to deploy your Azure resource programmatically. In this video, we are going to leverage on what we have learned to deploy the solutions discussed throughout this video series and deploy them with ARM. Thank you to Adityo, which have helped us prepare the solutions as well as a demo template together. Without further ado, let's get started. What you need to do at the first step is go to the Adityo repository page. I also created a QR code over here. I'll make sure that I'll put this link as a video in the video description shortly. So let me move to my browser. As you can see that this is Adityo's repository. Over here, we have a README file that briefly explain about these solutions, including the links to the video series if you have not watched them. The three main sections about this repo, first of all, is the source code of the Web API project that used as a sample project. The second one is the ARM deployment template. And the last one is a slide which I have presented throughout this video series. Before perform the actual deployment, there are a couple of things that you need to have as a prerequisites. First one obviously is an Azure account. Make sure that you have one. And the second step is make sure that you fork this repo to your own GitHub repo so that you can start performing any modification later on. And the third step is to associate your GitHub account in your Azure Functions or at the app service deployment. The reason is as part of the deployment, we will fetch the source code from GitHub. So you have to do that at least once. You can look at the instruction here, how you may want to do that. The fourth step is you need to get ready some AAD keys as well as secret. And you can do that by following the tutorial by John Gallen. The reason why we need to do this is because we will be performing a database failover from the Azure function, and in order to perform the failover, we need to have that credential. All right, make sure that you keep this securely and don't expose that info to the public. Okay, now let's move on to the one-click deployment. Now, if you see that the objective is trying to perform the deployment as simple as possible by just click this deploy to .azure button, which is pretty simple. I'm going to do that in my repo. As I mentioned to you earlier that we will have to do that in my repo. As you can see that I have already forked the repo into my GitHub account /Welly, right? And I'm going to hit the deploy.azure button. So essentially, this deploy.azure button is calling an Azure portal by providing these templates located in deployment, the Azure deployment.json file. Basically, we are going to pump in this file as parameter so that you can start creating the resource based on the template provided here. What you need to fill in are some important information. First step is to define the resource group. So you can choose an existing resource group or create a new one. So I happen to have an empty resource group, so I can verify to you that right now it's still empty, nothing here. And then choose your secondary region. This is where you want when you perform the failover from the primary to the secondary. This is the region that you want. So in the primary region, mine is Southeast Asia. The secondary I'm going to choose is US. Tenant ID, client ID, and client secret are the three information that you have to capture as part of the step number step number 4 prerequisites over here. Okay, and then you may want to fill in your email address, and this is a to and from email address of an email when performing verifications, whether or not you want to do a database failover, or if the failover has successfully been performed, you will receive an email from this email, the origin and target. the next important step is to replace this value with your GitHub repo. And in this example, I'm going to use Wally. All right. That's pretty much all. The other parameters are all optional. In fact, we have pre-filled for you already so that you don't have to spend too much time filling it. The You can definitely still change the value to your preference. That's perfectly okay. And then go ahead to hit agree and purchase. So I have already pre-filled most of the info in the other tab to make sure that we make use of the time effectively. So I'm going to hit purchase here. So what it does, it will start performing a validations of my ARM template to make sure that it is a valid JSON ARM template. Okay. So if it is successfully validated, what it will be doing next is to perform the actual deployment of ARM. So this will take somewhere between 4 to 6 or 7 minutes. We'll revisit this shortly. You see that right now the deployment is in progress. A couple of things that I want to show you is the ARM template file. Okay, let me scroll all the way up. As you can see, that there are 4 main sections in the ARM templates: the parameter, variable, resources, and output. And output is optional. So you can see that parameter that we define here just basically provide different parameter that allow you to enter the value in the UI, which I showed you earlier on, right? What a target email, event hub name, and so on. And we can definitely have some default value so that the user do not have to type in manually. Moving on, it's variable. So over here, we've got some variable, for example, like a web app locations and then the web app stage. So this value could be defined as a template itself, or the combinations with what we have entered in parameter. All right. If you remember in the previous video, I spent a bit of time explaining about the concept of copy and copy index feature in the ARM. Basically enable you to create a multiple iterations without have to hard coding it. So I always like to use the analogy of a for each in ARM, right? So over here, I make use of that feature to create a multiple app service plan or server farm, making use of the copy index and the copy feature. Okay. The other thing that I want to highlight here is the depends on, right? So this capability enabled you to define relationship between various service. Should there be some resource needs to be created before another. In its example here, we have a resource called config, and config should be created only it's the only the value in depends on section has been completed, which is server farm and server side. So it doesn't make sense to have a config before you have the server farm and server side, right? So this is how we define the resource. And obviously we have a lot of resource here, which I don't think I have enough time to going through the details. So feel free to take a look, feel free to modify to your liking as well. So let's jump back to the web page. So it looks like it is still running. It's not yet completed. That's fine. I'm going to show you what you may need to expect post the deployment. So as I mentioned earlier, the objective is trying to deploy that as easy as possible with a one-click deployment. But there are 2 steps that you still need to do manually. The first step is to load the database. We provided a SQL DDL file, the data definition file here. It's also as part of this GitHub page. As you can see that nothing is fancy. We're just trying to create a table called order and trying to load in a few dummy records. Okay, so I can get ready, copy this into my clipboard. Okay, you can use your previous tools like SQL Server Management Studio or query editor as part of Azure portal to execute that SQL file, right? I think one step that you may need to do before doing that is to explicitly grant your client IP firewall. So I provide a link over here as well in terms of how you could allow the client IP firewall so that you can access your resource in additions of the username and password. So this is like a second layer of security. So I need to do that later on. Um, and then what you also need to do is grant a Logic app a permission to send an email. Since we are using the Office 365 account, well, optionally you can use an SMTP and then you put in the SMTP username and password either as a hard code or as a parameter. That's perfectly fine as well. We're trying to use Logic app here as well as the Office 365. That's why you will have to prompt the OAuth in order to send email. Okay. If you have done all the steps, you can verify that by going to the traffic manager URL and append /API/order. If everything goes well, you will have a very simple API JSON file. And over here, you will be able to see that in the HTTP header, the web region is supposed to be from your primary region. And then the DB server name header should be from your SQL Server primary. Okay. We also provide a known issue page that enable you to cross-check and verify if you have encountered any issue. Okay. If none of this be able to solve your problem else, feel free to let us know in GitHub issue, and myself and Aditya will be able to help you. All right, let's check back again to see whether the deployment is completed. Looks like it is almost done, not really done. All right, just nice. It is completely done. So I'm going to hit go to resource button. And as mentioned, the first step that I need to do post the deployment is to go to my server and then allow my client IP address, because we will be running the DDL script. So I'm going to hit the SQL Server firewall and then allow my client IP to access it and click Save. So step one is done. So the next step that I need to do is go to my SQL database from my primary region. And in fact, before coming there, I want to make sure that the failover group in my primary region has been successfully defined. So I go back to my server again. As you can see that this is not correctly defined. That's okay. Let me fail back to my primary. Okay. So so I would expect to see that the failover group, the primary server should point to the primary and the secondary server should point to secondary. So so that's expected behavior. That's okay. What we're going to do next is to go to the SQL Server database, again, the primary region. After the failover, I would imagine that this will become the primary. And then go to my query editor, put my username. Let me allow to log in that. Oh, there you go. It's wrong. All right, I am in. So the next step that I need to do is just paste the script from my clipboard, which I copied earlier, and run the script. So as you can see that now I've got 9 row affected, which looks like successfully completed the run. The next step that I may want to do is to go to the Logic app and then perform the OAuth authentication. So you notice that we actually have 2 Logic apps, so you can choose one of them, and you only have to do once. You don't have to do both of them. All right. So go to my Logic app, and then as soon as this was load, I'm going to click Edit, and then look at the Logic App Designer and find the Office 365 send email connector and explicitly define my username and password for my Office 365 account for email sending. You see that it's mentioned as invalid connection. That's because I have not run my OAuth yet. So I'm going to do that now. hit this exclamation mark button, and then it will bring me to another OAuth web page, and allow me to define my account. So I'm going to choose my email address with has connected. So that's all. That's all what you need. Once it is successfully done, you will see that the invalid message is no longer here, and then you are pretty much good to go. So how do you verify that you are good to go? Is go to the traffic manager and grab that traffic manager URL. All right, that's the one. And I'm going to copy it in another browser and /API/order. So if this goes well, I would imagine that I'll get some JSON record as part of the SQL Server DDL, which we have entered earlier, and then you can verify the HTTP header, and that tells that your web region is pointing to Southeast Asia, and the database is pointing to a primary. And obviously, what you can do is then stop the primary region to simulate the failover. And you can look at my video number 7, which I walk through all this in more details. That's pretty much all for today. Thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you enjoy this series. I'll see you next time.